In the 1990s, actually in 1993, there was a movie released called Grumpy Old Men. Jack Lemmon, Walter Matthau, Anne Margaret was the stars of that show. And you think of the premise, you wouldn't think it would be funny. It would be anything to it. About two grumpy old men, and they were grumpy. It was such a successful movie that Hollywood does what they always do. If you made money on the first one, you make another one. So in 1995, they came out with Grumpier Old Men, and it was fun to watch and to see their experiences and how that played out and the funny things that happened. But let's be real honest. To be a grumpy old man or a grumpy old woman or a grumpy teenager or a grumpy whoever in life is not much fun. And it's not much fun being around a grumpy old person. You know, it may be a hit in Hollywood in a movie, but it's not in life. You know, the whole month of November, we have been focusing on a series that we're calling Gratitude, Living a Life of Thankfulness. And it fits perfectly for November. Thanksgiving that month, we're heading right into the Christmas season. But I also think it's just great to do it in this month, to focus on this because of Veterans Day. Just a way to express, again, thank you for that. You know, ungratefulness is not healthy. And we talked about this last week, that people who are ungrateful actually have more medical problems. They have more emotional problems. But gratefulness it releases something in our lives to make us happier and more adjusted. We talked about it. Gratitude, the definition, gratitude is the practice of actively remembering. Let that sink in. It's not just all of a sudden you think of something or you say thank you. It is actively remembering and expressing the grace and goodness bestowed in our lives. It's a conscious choice that we make, that I want to be a grateful person. I want to think about, I want to express to people my gratitude, express to God how I feel. So, of course, the opposite of that, ingratitude, is just the opposite. It's the failure or refusal to acknowledge the blessings in our lives, the good things from others, the good things from God. And however you look at it, when you peel away every excuse and reason that we give, gratitude or ingratitude is a choice. We choose what kind of person we're going to make. It's all about choices. David is a good example from the Old Testament. David had it all. He had all the success in the world. He was a military hero. He had the respect of the people. He was adored by the whole nation. He had riches and success. You name it, he had it. But his gaze went some other place other than the blessings that he had. And he gazed upon a woman. And then it led to adultery. And then one thing led to another, and a series of sins that were committed that brought so much pain to a whole nation. It not only broke people's hearts, it broke David's heart. Because his life, he carried the scars of those sins for the rest of his life. Gratitude is the wellspring of life. And once again, if that is true, then ingratitude robs you of a sweet life. I want to look at one Old Testament account that you're very familiar with. In Exodus chapter 16, if you want to turn there, we're going to read there several times, but it's going to be on the screen as well. But this is the account of where Moses has led the people out of Egypt. They have been slaves for 400 years. He leads them out. They're on the way to the promised land. And this takes place. Exodus chapter 16, verses 1 through 3. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. And I like the way it says that. That just points out, too, as they've been on the road for like 45 days. They've been in the desert. They have been traveling from Egypt. And in 45, the supplies are running out or running low. The chapter before, they tell us that they're out of water, and God provides them water. But, of course, they grumbled in doing that. The excitement of being set free is dwindling. and now they're worried about the food that they would eat. Freedom has given way to physical need. I liked what one author said. He said, as their bellies began to rumble, their mouths began to grumble. And that's a lot of truth in that. It goes on in verse 2. It says, in the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. And just as we struggle with our physical needs and how it seems to rise to the top, that our physical needs seem to rise to the top of and push everything out of the way, Israel suffered from the same thing. Physical needs suppressed or pushed aside all of the spiritual things that they had. The fear of hunger overwhelmed everything. Their focus shifted from the Lord's provision to another. They looked back and said, Egypt is our preference. Egypt could do a better job. You know, for spiritual beings, we sure do spend a lot of time on the physical things. We sure spend a lot of time worrying about physical things. And we go on and learn from reading here in Exodus 16 that God hears her. He says he hears their grumbling. And he responded, not as I would. He sends them manna, bread. He sends them quail, meat to eat every day. God surely is gracious, patient, and kind. Moses delivers this good news to them for God. But he also sees this as a teaching opportunity to educate them, to try to mature them up, to help them realize what they're doing. Skip down to verse 8. He says, you will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You're not grumbling against us, but against the Lord. Moses understood something that the people didn't. Grumbling or complaining is so much deeper than we ever think it is. It goes so much deeper than we ever give it credit for. The complaints, I love the way Moses says it here. The complaints were directed towards Moses and Aaron. But Moses says, we don't have any power. We didn't set you free. We didn't part the Red Sea. We didn't bring the plagues. He says, it's God. So you're not complaining against us. You're complaining against God. But doesn't that describe us? We don't ever think that our complaining is an affront to God. We think we're complaining about the worker behind the counter who doesn't move at the speed that we think they should. Well, our complaint is against the spouse who doesn't meet our needs, who doesn't think the way we should. Or it's against our parents who we don't think give us enough freedom. It's about our job or about our supervisor, or we can even complain about our health. But in reality, it's a complaint to God. Moses says it's against God, and he wants the Israelites to realize what they're doing. And he wants the same for us. I cannot remember exactly what age it was, but I'm thinking I was 6th grade, somewhere around in there. And I'm ashamed to admit it, we're at a church youth rally. You remember when the churches used to get together, one's a Monday night a month, and you all went to a different church and had a rally. And we were at one, and I happened to be sitting beside someone, a friend, that went to another church, but we went to school together. And we were sitting there, and a woman came in, and I made some derogatory comment about her. And I really don't remember what I said, or I'm not going to tell you what it was about. And I remember saying that, trying to be funny. And he said, who are you talking about? And I said, that lady right over there. He said, that's my mom. And I kid, and I try to get that on people. Somebody will tell you something. I said, well, that's my uncle you're talking about, when it really isn't. But, I do that kind of stuff. But he was serious. I had just said something derogatory about his mother. And I remember trying to make excuses and to cover it up. But I don't think our relationship was ever the same all the way through school, because I had a mental block then. Is he still thinking about what I said? And so I don't know if he held it against me, but I couldn't get past it because of what I'd done. You see, we never think it's as deep as it is. And when we complain and we think it's just in an innocent way of complaining and grumbling against someone or something, it's deeper than that. Moses says it's against God. You're complaining to him, and he tries to educate them, to help them understand. And he wants us to understand it too. Moses understood something else that I don't think they did. We become what we behold. We become what we behold. It seems unbelievable that people would say this, but let's go back and read verse 3 again. He says, the Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into the desert to starve this entire assembly to death. Number one, that's just simply not true. They were an oppressed people. They were being worked to death. Their children were being taken away and killed. And he says, we sat around and ate pots of meat, all we wanted. They may have ate potted meat, but they didn't have pots of meat to eat. So it was not as good as they said, but we become what we behold. They elevated their enslaver to a place of prominence and preference before God. They said, we would rather have the people who put us in slavery than the God who let us out. If we behold anger, we just end up living an angry life. If we behold envy, we end up being jealous of other people and what they have. If we harbor and behold frustration, we transform into a person who's always frustrated and quarrelsome. And Moses knew that if the people beheld grumbling as a way of life, that they would remove themselves far from the heart of God. I think that's why Paul says this in Philippians 2:14 and 15. He says, do everything without complaining or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God, without fault in a crooked and depraved generation, in which you shine like stars in the universe. Paul knew that complaining and arguing would do to them what it would do to them and what it would keep them from achieving. He says, so notice that he says, don't complain and argue so that you may become. He said, in the absence of those things, you'll become these things. You'll become like shining like stars in the universe. But if you keep complaining and arguing, you'll lose that. You will never become what God wanted you to be. Some of the Israelites died. Many of them died in the wilderness directly because of their grumbling and complaining. Go back and read the whole account for yourself. You'll see what I mean. They missed out on the joy of being free because they complained, because they pushed God to the limits, and they never made it to the promised land. Beholding the wrong things always causes us to drift away, and we never drift away into a vacuum. What I mean is, you never drift from God and not drift to something. If you find yourself drifting from God, trust me, you're drifting towards something else. It's never an innocent drift. It never is not harmless. The two Hebrew words that are used in the Old Testament to describe grumbling, one denotes growling. Growling like a dog. That's the word they would use for a dog growling at you. You ever had a dog growl at you? Yeah. This was some years ago. Someone in our congregation passed away, and I went to a family member's house. Excuse me. I went to a family member's house to work on the funeral arrangements. And just as soon as I knocked on that back door, it was a big glass door, they had two big dogs in the house, and they're just like trying to tear the door down to rip me to shreds. Just right at the door. Come on in. They won't bother you. Yeah, how many times have I heard that? Yeah, come on in. They won't bite. But they finally get one. They kick him in the back bedroom, and he's still just trying to tear the door down to come to me. And one, he runs into the living room, and so we're in the kitchen. He's in the living room the whole time. The whole time we're trying to work on the funeral arrangement, he's just growling and snarling at me. And then he kind of slipped around. And we were sitting at the kitchen table, and he came and got under the kitchen table, and he put his head right up, right at the chair, and just looked right up between my legs at me and just went, the whole time. I'm saying this thing could go bad very quickly. Very quickly. So I said, I think that's all I need for the funeral. I think I got all I need here, you know. But that feeling of a dog growling at you. Growling. And that's one of the words that's used in the Old Testament to describe grumbling. The other word means whispering rebellion. Whispering rebellion. You ever walked in a room and you could tell people were talking about you? They never admit it. They never admit it, you know, but you can tell. That awkward moment when, you know, they were talking about you, and maybe you've had this happen to you at work, something like that happened. Then you find out that somebody had said something behind your back and maybe got a work project changed or something, you know, like that. Whispering rebellion. So to describe grumbling by the way the Old Testament language would have been is grumbling is growling against God. Here's something else that Moses learned. Grumbling rejects gratitude and asks why. You notice the people ask that? Why are we out here? Why did you drag us out here? We had it so good where we're at. Why? We start to live. Grumbling makes us live in the land of why. Why has this happened? Why hasn't my life turned out the way I thought it would? Why am I further along in life than I thought it would be at this point? How come I don't have it? Why don't I have more money? Why don't I have a better job? You see, the why is birthed from a place of discontent. And this discontent then gives birth to the posture of ingratitude. And then we choose to remain in that thought process that says, this is not enough. This is not what I want. Then we say those terrible words, I deserve, and then you put the word at the end. And we'd all be better if we could just strike that word from our language, I deserve, because it never leads to anything better. It just causes discontent. It causes us to live in the world of why. This is grumbling. The Israelites said, we're hungry. God says, I give you manna. They said, we don't want bread, I want. You fill in the blank. I'm tired of quail. I want. You fill in the blank. And where we need to be and where we have to find ourselves is, ask yourself, is there a sense of discontentment in your soul that has you stuck in the why of life? That we have to begin to ask ourselves, why do I complain? Why do I grumble? Am I complaining a lot? Do I complain about a lot of things? Do I complain about the same thing over and over? Do I look at my life and say, this isn't right, this is not enough, I deserve more? Or do we live in that constant state of I want, I wish I still had? Do I look at other people's lives and say, I wish I had their life, I wish I had their spouse, their possessions, the experiences, the vacations, the children, the house, the job? You see, these grumbles take the form of questions and murmurs under our breath, the thoughts that cross our minds, which seep out into our conversations, and in actuality, It's what the Bible calls the spirit of ingratitude. But thankfully, praise God, thankfully, grumbling does not have to have the final say in our lives. Grace is greater. God's grace surpasses the grumble. He is gracious to forgive, even though we grumble. He's the answer to our ingratitude. He is the answer to moving the mountains in our lives. Actually, we don't have to move mountains in our lives. God does. We just have to become grateful people to move the needle in that direction. Now, how do we move that needle forward in our life? Let me ask you this. Does your life practice gratitude? If you're stuck in the why, if you're stuck there and just can't seem to get out, that's most likely because you need to release something to the Lord. You need to let go of something to God. Let it go. I've always loved the account in John where Jesus comes up at the temple there, and it's where the pools, remember the pools of water were there, and all the sick and disabled were laid around there. And the whole reason that they're there is that hopefully somebody said when the waters would stir, that somebody, if they were the first one to get in the water, they could be healed. So they were for that. And Jesus walks up and asks one of the most unusual questions in the Bible. He looks at a man who the Bible tells us had not walked in 38 years. Jesus looks at him and says, "Do you want to be well?" What is the whole reason he's there? Why is he what's the whole reason being at those pools? Do you want to be well? Jesus goes on and does what he was planning to do, and that was to heal the man. And he takes up his mat and he walks away. But it's a question that needs to be answered. Do you want to get well? I think a lot of us can find a lot of things wrong in our lives. We can find a lot of things wrong with other people. But if we want to be well, it starts with gratitude. Just being grateful for what God has blessed you with and what you have. And that's the way we get well. That's how we get out of the land of why and I deserve. So last week I said, just remember to actively be remembering, be thoughtful of the things God has blessed you with. And then express that gratitude. Find somebody to say thank you to. Thank you to God. Today it just goes the same thing. Keep doing those same things, but this time add a little bit. Begin to probe the heart and say, what is it that keeps me from living a life of gratitude for being made well?